Hello and welcome to White Centipede Noise Podcast. If you've been following the podcast, you've probably noticed that recently I've changed the way I publish new episodes. This podcast takes a considerable amount of time and resources to produce, so I've decided instead of publishing it for free and asking for donations like I did in the past, I've taken the responsibility of giving it a fair price that hopefully will match the work that goes into it. I know that a lot of people have hangups about so-called paywalls, but I would encourage you to kind of look at it like you do an independent magazine, which charges to read its interviews, or a concert where you have to pay an entry fee to get in. And you can rest assured that the money that you pay goes towards supporting the creation of that independent product. This entry fee also allows for more intimacy and discretion when talking about personal or difficult topics, and can help protect the authentic and unfiltered nature of the content. Going forward, the first 30 to 40 minutes of each episode will be free to the public, and the full episode, which is usually around 2 hours, will be reserved for paid Patreon subscribers. I do want anyone who's interested to be able to get an introduction to my guests, their work, and how this podcast works, but I want to stress that the full and thorough experience of the podcast is in the full episodes. When you support on Patreon, when you subscribe, you not only get the full episodes, you get WCN TV content, you can get access to the Discord server, and a lot of other exclusive noise content, including merch giveaways, digital giveaways. Subscription starts at the price of a cup of coffee per month, and you can cancel at any time. So go to patreon.com/White Centipede Noise now, and you'll switch over from this truncated version to the full version of this new episode. This is White Centipede Noise Podcast. I'm Oscar Brummel. Today, my guests are Ryan, Jeremy, and Frank of Yellow Tears, the infamous urological band and multimedia unit, whose headquarters, the Red Light District in Far Rockaway, New York, has been a pillar for extreme and outsider music in the USA for over 15 years. All right, hello, gentlemen. Ryan, Frank, and Jeremy. Welcome to White Centipede Noise Podcast. Ryan, Frank, and Jeremy of Yellow Tears, to be clear.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
You guys have such a rich history of so many activities between, you and your individual bands, projects together, Red Light District. There's a lot that we could dig into, and hopefully we'll get into some of it. But I think, can you guys just tell me, just starting off, kind of how you all got to know each other and in the context of like forming Yellow Tears?
Sure. Yeah. Why does it take this one?
Well, I would say maybe one of you guys.
Well, Jeremy and I met each other in high school. I was a senior in high school. He was a sophomore. I kind of scouted Jeremy out. He looked like someone I wanted to be friends with. I knew he was in a band. And so I kind of approached him at this show when I saw him there. And just kind of like remarked that, you go to the same high school as me. And he seemed uninterested at the time, but I kept pursuing the friendship, and we became friends that way, and have been ever since. We started going to shows together, and shared the music that we were into with each other. And I think I kind of always just wanted to play in the band with Jeremy, even at that point. And then I actually met Ryan a few years later at a show at his mom's house. And then it had turned out, and Jeremy will elaborate, that he met Ryan there, but had previously met Ryan like a few years before. Many years before, I guess, at that point, when they were in middle school.
Yeah. I had met Ryan at a local show on Long Island in New York.
So you guys are all New York City area.
On Long Island in the suburbs of New York City.
Okay.
Ryan was from a different town, but I had met him at a show. He must have been 12, maybe I was like 14. And we kind of had like a brief like AOL Instant Messenger kind of correspondence, and then that faded. You know, when you're that old, things like you just keep kind of like trying to find the people and the thing. But and then yeah, we ended up like re-meeting years later. And yeah, I think when we did, like, it felt like fate or something, or destiny, and we became very close at that point. Me and Ryan, and me and Frank, as he had said, were already close from our time hanging out together in school. So
Yeah, that was interesting. I think I could tell Jeremy was like a music fanatic when I first met him when I was like 12 years old. I remember he was like dancing, he was like rocking out to the band that I was playing. I was like, whoa, this guy like really fucks with this shit. Like he really loves music. But I think like, yeah, you know, by the time we all became like close friends, it was like, that's kind of like we decided that was our life trajectory. Maybe like it was going to be like music adjacent or something.
And I think the quality of our friendships, like certainly with me and Frank, like it was as if we had known each other forever, you know, like it was like as soon as we started hanging out, we were completely like intertwined. And later on, when I re-met Ryan and when Frank met Ryan, a similar thing happened. We just kind of became very close. Like we had a natural affinity for one another, you know, which was reinforced by like meeting him again in this new context. I think it kind of felt like,
Yeah.
oh, this is like special, and this is like noteworthy.
How then did it, I mean, that's a pretty textbook story of meeting friends in high school. How then did it like transition to forming this super fucked up band and like fucked up collective kind of going forward? Like at what point did that happen and you guys were like, oh, we're really not just all into music, we're like really into like this really intense brand or direction music?
Mm-hmm. I think maybe that has something to do with the fact that when we met Ryan, it was kind of like the punk scene, and Frank and I were, you know, Frank was really into hardcore when I met him, and like metalcore and some of the more extreme sounding stuff, outgrowth of like punk, you know, and I was starting to get into some of that. So, but there was, you know, I think we all were into punk and stuff, but we had an interest in like more too. Whereas a lot of the other people in that scene were kind of not like, you know, really like venturing into more experimental stuff. So I think like that gave us this common, like, oh, like searching for like the more deeper things and, you know, more sound and I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say, you know, it's just like we all were just getting into new stuff together. And the quality of our friendship, I think, has a lot to do with it too. It just like we felt very connected. And so we were kind of just on this journey together, and it just became a natural progression.
Yeah, I think for me, it was maybe personally, I got really into like, you know, I was very into punk. So that like ethos, I think naturally I was just interested in getting into more extreme stuff, like content wise and sound wise. And I started also to get really into like the sonic element of music and sound. I think like around the time that I met them, you know, I was already kind of like learning how to engineer and things like I had electronic music classes in school. And I was, you know, as I was getting more into like the sonic territory, I was getting more interested in like maybe more like psychedelic or extreme sounds. And, you know, around that time, Jeremy was in a band called Empty Silos Echo War that I felt like ticked a lot of those boxes, and I really liked. And I was starting to make music as well. I was like, oh, this is like, you know, I was interested in working and collaborating with Jeremy specifically. We started to around that time.
What about the content and the themes that you guys connected on? Because that's a huge part of, I mean, that's kind of what I'm getting at is like beyond just being into experimental music, it seems like the extreme content, the extreme themes of what eventually at least became Yellow Tears and things like that is a huge part of maybe the connection. What kind of media were you guys ingesting at that time and bonding over?
I mean, in the early years, we you know, I mean, before, like, you know, I'm talking about still in high school, I don't think we were really explicitly like talking about that stuff yet, but I think what it really comes down to is that our friendships became really close and intimate, and so like we were able to eventually, and yeah, getting into noise, obviously, like there was a lot of taboo subjects, and so it kind of like made a conversation possible about this type of content being like viable for exploration in like a band context.
Yeah, I think coming from punk too, you know, is like I think at least for me, I was like interested in more fringe and like extreme stuff, so that felt like a natural progression.
THFX Noise Devices is the home of the Melancholia, Vox Vortex, Harsh Anti, and the Rita's Cracked Point Shoe. Unique pieces and custom builds made of the best metal parts, no cheap plastics, no mass production. Handcrafted since 2021 in Hamburg, Germany. For more information and the mailing list, head over to thfxnoisedevices.com. So, when did Yellow Tears begin and how? I mean, I'm sure you guys messed around and had different bands before then and things like that, but like let's go from there when that was like and kind of onwards. How did that really come about? And was it as focused in the beginning as it has become now?
No.
And did you know what you wanted to do with it? Because, you know, there were a lot of, you know, tape releases around like, you know, 2000, I don't know, late kind of mid late 2000s, and then like kind of seems like the Piss Mop LP was like a big milestone, and things kind of went almost in a different direction after that. But definitely. The earlier stuff also shows those signs of, I mean, it's all connected. But at one point, how did it start, basically?
Well, Jeremy and I collaborated on a solo album I made. I was probably like 16 or 17. That was, it wasn't, I feel like it was like the first like noise record I made. You know, it was like, some of it was like standard instrumentation, but it was like extremely blown out. And the track that Jeremy and I worked on together was like guitar feedback and bass clarinet. He played bass clarinet through a frequency analyzer. So I guess that was probably the first collaboration we did. And then I think, you know, between Yellow Tears and Halflings, I think the Yellow Tears probably, that was the first...
Yeah, I mean,
practice was Yellow Tears. Yeah,
the literal specific reason why we started a group was because, well, obviously, yeah, me and Ryan and I had collaborated, and it was this seed that, like, you know, we wanted to do more stuff together, and I was kind of like on the last leg of, or you know, like, or at my kind of breaking point with doing the rock band format. I was playing drums in this band that Ryan mentioned, and we had kind of broken up, but then there was this opportunity to do this summer tour, which was in the 2005. And, you know, so we kind of did it. I was really trying to push these more extreme aspects into this band. And Frank came as like our roadie. You know, Frank had never played music before. He was a music lover. And we were so close, and you know, we really wanted him to be on this tour, me and another person in the band.
Right.
And there was another personality that was clashing in that band. But, you know, so we did this tour, and Frank was with us, and I was really trying to push these like noise aspects into the band. Like I had my little like, you know, bootleg tone generator set up and whatever that I was trying to inject into this music, and it really just like wasn't it, you know. And we were on this tour, and we were hanging out at this guy's house, listening to like Pauline Oliveros and just getting, you know, taking drugs, and it just kind of clicked, like, you know, we can do something together. Like this was me and Frank now having this like realization that like, you know, you don't have to have, you know, we were getting more into noise, wolf eyes and stuff like that. And so we kind of just had this realization, like, you know, we can do our own thing. I can break off from this band that I'm not really happy in, and we can have something that can really be ours and be this new exciting thing. And we called Ryan, like that night we were in DC, on tour, and it was just this really exciting like idea that we can have a noise band together. And there was actually a fourth member as well whose name is also Ryan at that time that we contacted. And so literally when we came back from that tour, like the week that we came back, we got together at this Ryan's mom's house and we had our first practice. And I think because we were coming from, like, we didn't really know how people made noise music, you know, we didn't have any blueprint for it. So we just kind of came up with our own way of orchestrating like songs, but it was very much like a band format. Like at that time we didn't use mixers. It was just, you know, for this song, I'm going to play this and you're going to play that. And we each had our own amplifier. So it was very much like in the tradition of like a rock band or something. And I think in a lot of ways that informed like the composition style, which was very loose in the early days, but it was very much like loose changes. There was like structural aspects with a lot of room for like flexibility within that. Like it was kind of more like the instrumentation would be set. Maybe some of the effects processing would be like a certain way, and there would be kind of like gestures that happened at certain points throughout like the piece. Like this is the part where I'm doing this and you're doing that, and then we're going to change and we'll be looking at each other, you know? And so I think like very early on, we developed that language of performance and of like composition together where we're like communicating in other ways, in nonverbal ways with our bodies and whatnot. But it wasn't very like compositional, at least that was something that we developed slowly. And by the time we were working on the Pissmop, that was a conscious decision to start like making, you know, more compositional music and also music that incorporated the concepts that we were kind of starting to explore, you know, more explicitly and with more intention. And that was, you know, that was really like a couple of years of development towards that style. But yeah, even in the earliest days, there was the seeds for that, I think, you know.
So those days you were recording still. So a lot of those earlier releases were from that period of you guys just kind of as a 3-piece.
As a 4-piece.
So 4-piece, right.
Yeah, it was a 4-piece from, I guess, the inception in 2005 until actually we recorded the Pissmop. It was still a 4-piece, but it was shortly after we finished recording and before we went on this big tour to promote the album with Alzig Elziga in the summer of 2008 that the other person left the project. So it really was, you know, yeah, that whole first period from 2005 until like the summer of 2008 where it was a 4-piece. And then it became the 3-piece for that tour, basically.
Liquid Diet, I believe the tape came out on Hospital before the Pissmop. And from then on, you guys worked with Hospital very regularly, maybe almost exclusively, on those, at least those several releases that came after that. Was that Liquid Diet release significant in some way, you know, sound wise or theme wise? And did Dominic have any influence in the direction of the band?
I think Liquid Diet was kind of the culmination of the first few years in terms of releases, maybe because it felt more like a condensed version of like that compositional approach, I think. And I think sonically too. At the time, it felt a little bit more nuanced than the early stuff in terms of like mixing and whatnot. But it definitely, I remember feeling like the stakes were a little higher because it was a hospital release, and it was someone we definitely like looked up to in the scene, putting it out.
Yeah, and I guess like the other aspect of it, it was the first tape to have like the last track on it is full on just samples. It's like kind of like a very basic like sample collage, but I think, and then there were some like other samples like sprinkled throughout the tape. So I think in that sense, it was like, you know, beginning to kind of transition to our later stuff, because we didn't really use samples in the early days before that. But also, I guess it is kind of like important. I think to some degree, just Dom taking interest in the project, I think gave us kind of this feeling that maybe we needed to pursue Yellow Tears more, I guess, like, because what had happened was Halflings was on a tour in the summer of 2006.
And Halflings is you and Ryan?
And Ryan, yeah.
Yes.
So we had started that actually shortly after we had started Yellow Tears, but because of Frank was in school in Albany at that time, so we were kind of like unable to do Yellow Tears except for on school breaks. And we had, around that same time when we started Yellow Tears, gotten into like White House and kind of started in Condom and started discovering like power electronic. And it really spoke to me, especially. So we had started, Ryan and I had then started this like power electronics project to, you know, we had more access to one another. I was at school at SUNY Purchase, which isn't too far from Long Island. So I was taking a lot of trips back there. And so that whole year we were kind of able more so to focus on that project more. It wasn't necessarily like a preference. It was kind of just, we had more access to each other. And so we did that Halflings tour, and we ended up getting Dom to play the last show of the tour, which also had Viadre and a couple other people. But I remember, you know, Dom came up to our merch table, and we had a couple of Yellow Tears things, and he immediately gravitated towards that and was just like, what's this? You know, I like this name. And so I think definitely just him taking an interest in it, like, and we looked up to him so much, and you know, he was one of our favorite artists. So it definitely, like, for me, I can say for sure it raised the stakes and of that project in general. It was like, okay, no, maybe there's something here that we weren't like seeing, or and so I think then, you know, and I don't exactly remember how like what the process was of him asking us to do that tape, but it couldn't have been much after that he suggested it. I mean, we were going to hospital a lot when he had the store in the basement of Jammyland at that time, and I think he definitely at some point was like, I want to do like a Yellow Tears tape. And so then, you know, yeah, I mean, I don't know that we consciously were like, we have to change things or progress it, but I think we definitely like felt like we want it to be better, or like somewhat of an evolution, because we revered Hospital, and, you know, we were very like honored to be asked to have a tape for it. So
actually, just I was able to find the email from Dom.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah. So he asked about it, and he said 20-minute tape would be good. Of course, it's subject to approval. No wanky noise, just good dark works. Sexual, evil, fetish, depression themes a plus, I think. And then the email got cut off. I wonder what that last thing was.
Okay, so yeah, maybe he was encouraging that stuff, which he was obviously seeing in like the tapes that he got, and wanted us to explore it more. I guess it was like a subtle, you know, kind of like pushing us into that direction, maybe. So right. I mean, yeah, I didn't remember that, but I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
So then tell me about how that LP came about in terms of, I mean, there's a lot that's different there. There's a lot of focus there. I mean, it's a highly focused LP, conceptually, sound-wise, visually, and very different from at least what I've heard from like the previous works, they were pretty just kind of like raw. No, not they weren't raw. I mean, but they were produced. But you know, like you said, they were very noisy, very harsh. And this is very atmospheric, very composed. The samples, the field recordings. So how did you approach this LP? How did you make it? And what was the process?
So that actually, you know, we had done the Liquid Diet tape. I think Dom like was happy with what we gave him and was kind of like maybe had offered us an LP. I can't remember. It must have been. So, you know, for the first LP, we definitely like we were starting to evolve already, and we were starting to get deeper into some of the themes that we had been exploring. So we saw it as like the opportunity to really like progress. And, you know, we were all like our little crew, which was already forming, that became Red Light. I mean, a lot of us were in a composition, like a music composition program at school, some of us. So, it was basically like what, you know, it was what we had all been like working towards, I guess. And we wanted to, yeah, I mean, well, we were really composing it basically. I mean, you know.
So that's worth noting, is that you guys seem to have like musical educations, right?
Yeah,
and you were part of musical educations at the time, and we're like,
mine. It's different for all of us, I think. I mean, Jeremy had a musical education. My education started in production and engineering, you know, which I think is the other important aspect of the band. Right. That like when we would record all this stuff, we would multi-track it properly. We would like try and do it in a studio when possible. We would like do, you know, like a lot of those collage pieces on the record. We would like figure out interesting ways to like sculpt the sound, whether it be like miking techniques or, you know, integrating like weird acoustics, like natural reverbs and silos or something like that.
Yeah.
So there were like different dimensions, I think, that we were pulling from like musically and sonically at that, like when we decided to do this record. I think it was things that like we had thought about in the past and we had tried to put into place in the music, but like the world kind of expanded at that point. Equipment wise too.
Divine Severance is an Australian label that releases a variety of different genres, including but not limited to harsh noise, power electronics, black metal, death metal, and more. Tapes soon to be released in the coming months: Moore's Fornax, The Death Furnace Demo, Rope Society, The Golden Rim, Astra Telepathica, The Emperor Protects, Puddle, Pulling Back the Layers of Unbridled Joy. Visit divineseverancerecords.bandcamp.com. So Ryan, as the kind of the engineer producer of side of the band, if it's what I'm understanding, what was the LP's recording process like from that aspect? Did you guys book studio time? Were you approaching each song kind of like one at a time? Did you see the whole album as an arc, or were they kind of individual pieces that just got put together at some point?
I mean, I think we saw like the end goal of this cohesive album that would become the Pissmop LP, but it was all these very small like moving parts. Part of it was like we would work individually on certain pieces, and then collectively we would come up with these compositions, rehearse them, you know, maybe perform them at shows. So we had this like feedback with the songwriting process. And then, you know, when it would come time to record some of the songs, we did actually go into proper studios at SUNY Purchase, which Jeremy and our other collaborators with had access to. And some of it we recorded up at Bard College, where we would rehearse a lot. We did a lot of overdubs there as well. And then, you know, the things that like we would do individually, we do it like Jeremy would probably be in his dorm room and I'd be in my apartment in the Bronx. And those are more, I feel like those are more just like collage heavy, like edited pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were definitely, you know, I think we started to like, we wanted to have, it was the first kind of time we really like foresaw this like almost like narrative or something, like you're saying, like an arc. But yeah, we didn't have it all figured out the whole time.
Yeah.
It was definitely like there were some songs that we wrote and like Ryan's saying like rehearsed, and then it kind of was all coming together even up until like the end, you know, like I remember the song, the Piss Mop Ryan made in Max MSP, which was a new thing that he was starting to use at the time, which completely transformed both our compositional abilities and our live performance. But
Yeah,
that
I think
was,
using computers was
a couple of weeks before like the submission deadline. I feel like it was like we were still figuring it out, you know, and like kind of fitting these smaller pieces that became kind of the glue that helped solidify like the entire story of it, I guess.
I think so, and I think like conceptually we were taking the themes more seriously and integrating, trying to like marry the themes and the sound like in a more interesting way, you know. I think like earlier on, naturally like the sound, the themes matched like kind of like the violence or the extremity of the sound, you know. But I think with the Pissmop LP, the themes just got like more esoteric and like bizarre, maybe, you know. And the sound world's got like more interesting, you know, like texturally and compositionally.
Out now on White Centipede Noise, Dry Routine, the new LP by Ochu. 5 minimal and decided arrangements of raw organic waste, tired motors, and idling electronic signals. Sounds that are unmistakably worldly, spun into Ochu's signature malaise, making them impossible to place. A continuation of the trajectory established on his preceding albums, Unproductive and Lähmung des Wartens, this time with a slightly noisier edge. Limited to 200 copies on black vinyl, with hand-stamped coffee-stained sleeves and insert. Available now at whitecentipedenoise.com or soon from a distro near you. I mean, if you guys were part of like recording at like SUNY and stuff like that, I assume you had kind of a peer group that wasn't just, you know, the basement dwelling noise scene people. What did they think of all of this stuff you guys were working on at the time?
I don't know
were you able to share it with them and be like, "Oh, guys, we got this band called Yellow Tears. We're working on the Pissmop and doing gargling and stuff like that." I mean,
yeah. Well, I mean, as far as other people I purchased, we didn't really have a much larger friend group than just the people who kind of became Red Light. It was pretty insular. We didn't really have like. I mean, we were like acquaintances and people knew us that we did like noise and stuff, but it wasn't really that intimate. And as far as like our friends from Long Island, unfortunately, when we did start to do like Halflings and Yellow Tears and start to kind of share it with them, it wasn't accepted really. And so it was kind of this slow like detachment from that group of people that would have been, you know, still happening around the time of the Pissmop, but we would have known then not to really like share that with those people, which I think naively we did like share it in the early days. Like we would post shows and like, you know, share our like lyric books and stuff, and it came back to bite us to some extent. Like people were very uncomfortable with that, and so
was it mostly the content or just the type of music in general?
I think the content, really, but I think also the type of music wasn't really attractive to most of those people. But I think the content is what felt offensive to people.
I think some people were intrigued by it, though, who you wouldn't expect it. You know, like some people from the punk scene entertained it, or, you know, like I had a group of friends that I lived with before we recorded the Pissmop, but, you know, out of high school that were more like from the punk scene. I think we would like have you know, like we'd have shows and they thought it was cool. I got, you know, like I think like Carlos played at my old apartment and we outside. We did, yeah. like there was a period where maybe it was okay. Like there was some crossover maybe with the music, but it was a very short amount of time, you know?
So I guess the concepts and themes are a big thing we have to dive into, and we're kind of tiptoeing around them at this point. I have, I ask people usually from Patreon and stuff, and on like the Discord server, I have if they have questions for the guests, and got a few questions for you. And I think one of the most like direct questions that'll pierce this bubble is one person asked, "Do you guys like to drink piss?"
We
Frank,
necessarily like to drink this. And certainly on the,
do what you gotta do.
Yeah, on the Pissmop LP, I think it was, we were focused more thematically on kind of piss fetish, and I think the band kind of is now like associated with that. And I will say that we did drink each other's piss as part of the recording process, because I think we wanted to feel fully immersed in the themes and concepts that we were exploring. We felt that we had to do that. I wouldn't say that I'm not personally into piss fetish. I don't, get off on that. I don't piss in people's mouths.
None of you guys?
I'm not against it.
I would certainly accept piss from drink certain people's piss, maybe.
Yeah.
But,
I think it's, yeah, I think this is part of the, maybe we're going to ruin our own lore here, but, well, I can say for sure that I think I probably am the genesis of like the piss themes. I think I came up with the band name, pornography that had piss and piss drinking in it. It's something that I discovered in high school, and it certainly impacted me very deeply. But at the end of the day, I think it's less about the specificity of that as much as it is the concepts and the implications that it kind of brought up. So
you mentioned being esoteric. I mean, I want to cut you off, but you mentioned the esoteric nature of it. And it seems like at this point, it's become an allegory for many things. I mean,
absolutely.
Can you start to talk about that a little bit in some way?
I mean, I think it's definitely, I think this concept that we've explored in several different ways that really represents well is the idea of, a lot of times you hear the intersection of the sacred and the profane, but I think what we've really focused on is the intersection of the profane and the mundane. So it's kind of the everyday, like these kinds of like perversions of everyday existence and of everyday things, and how that seeps into everyday life. And I think that's a pretty big overarching theme. And I think piss is a really great, symbol of that, because it's,
in order to watch or listen to the full episode, you'll need to subscribe at patreon.com/White Centipede Noise. Once you do, you'll get access to full episodes of the podcast, WCN TV content, and much more.